Drama chaos as MPs vote for tax. That's a big one on the front page of the Daily Nation this morning, mainly to do with the chaotic scenes witnessed in the National Assembly yesterday. Standoff as MPs endorse new fuel tax. Same story on the front page of the Standard. Yesterday we were treated to hours and hours of chaotic scenes inside the august house, the National Assembly, as they passed those tax proposals presented to them by President Uhuru Kenyatta, and as soon as he assents to that bill, it becomes law. This will have a lot of implications on your daily life, and we have this morning for our news review Sam Atandi, MP Alego Songa. Good morning, karibu sana.
Good morning. Good morning.
Martha Wangari, MP Gilgil.
Good morning, Ndimuli.
And Kipruto Rapkirwa, Deputy Party Leader, ANC.
Good morning, Fred.
Of course, it's always good to have Kipruto Rapkirwa on the panel because he always brings a level of sobriety to the kind of debate
Are you saying you're not sober?
Well, watching members of the National Assembly yesterday...
Did you just say
a lot can be said about the behavior of members of the National Assembly yesterday. But let me just start here. What happened, Sam Atandi, Honorable, what happened yesterday in the National Assembly? Because at some point, it was a media blackout. We could not see even the parliamentary TV unit just went on blank, just to allow you people to actually carry out your role. But what exactly happened?
Well, I would like to say that yesterday was going to be dramatic because of the matters that were to be canvassed yesterday, You know, the issue of the President Memorandum was very, very important, and many Kenyans expressed themselves on the direction that members of parliament should have taken. So it had to be dramatic, and I think that is the level that it went. And I'm also happy that for the first time we saw members across the board, you know, coming on board and saying this is our position. Unfortunately, again, we have to take the blame as parliament for failing to have this memo rejected.
Yes. Were you a part of the team that was hoping to have that, these proposals rejected?
No.
I must be honest and say that as parliament, as members of parliament, we are guided by our political parties. And you know, my party took a position on this issue through a parliamentary group meeting, and we had our position known. And I had to stand with the position of my party. Of your party. I must be honest.
And that was to support the president's proposals.
I was not part of the team that made noise in parliament, because I also believe that parliament is an intellectual house. So
are you part of the team that was forced to leave the chambers so that
nobody can be forced to leave the chambers? It must be made clear.
Were you part of the team that walked out of the chambers?
Movement in and out of parliament is not restricted by our standing orders.
Were you part of the team that walked out of parliament?
You know, Fred, we are not here to discuss my personal contribution.
No. It is about what happened yesterday.
We are here to discuss what happened in parliament, but not to put me.
So you're not able to answer that question.
Not to put me on the red carpet, because as we talk,
you're not able
members of parliament made a decision yesterday on this issue. But what I want to say is that we are an intellectual house, and we cannot turn ourselves into a howling institution.
Fair enough. Quite a number of MPs actually walked out of the chambers to occasion a lack of quorum that actually enabled this motion to pass. But what happened, Honorable Martha Wangari? Because on this panel last week, you promised that this one, we will actually vote on our conscience.
We did, actually. And I don't know why Honorable Atandi is running away from his yes. Even last week he had said he will support, and I had said I will oppose. And we tried to oppose, and I'm sorry that it got to what it became.
What went wrong?
Personally, I would say I was really disappointed by the behavior in parliament. I think as a house we really must pull up our socks. And you know, coming from the Senate where discussions were usually just structured and you know, you use your brains and not your mouth, you don't step on the seats. I think it's something I have to learn, really, to be chaotic and to be in such a mood like we saw yesterday. But what happened in the Muli is that, you know, for a constitutional threshold, I think where we had a faulty start is that when we went to vote clause by clause in the Committee of the Whole, which was presided by the Narok Women Rep, Soipan Tuya, she actually put a question to a noise vote. And if you read the standing orders, 72 clearly says if there's a constitutional threshold required, then you'd go directly to a division that would mean that we'll have to ensure there is good quorum, more than 232 members. That is 233, the minimum, to be able to take a vote. And when she tried to do it again, already it had already been seen that the nays had it, and you pronounced the ayes had it. Whatever reasoning that was. But she may have said, because how do you quantify nays to say there were 233 or there were 232? So now that is where the problem started. And to tell you the truth, I think we were short of a few members to reach the threshold. From where I sat, we mobilized. We really whipped people to vote, and we voted across. So the biggest problem, across board.
So the biggest problem was actually raising the 233. Across board,
people are actually ready to shoot down the memo for different reasons. I will tell you my reasons as we go ahead, why I was categorically voting no. The leadership of the House also had its own ideas, and that's why you hear people say, Duale got people to walk out. You know, they used intimidation. They actually took people's cards from the machines, the voting machines, took them, you know, members themselves, and it was irresponsible. And I could see the leader of majority bragging about it and saying those are tricks. And I would tell them and tell the leadership that this is the beginning of getting Parliament back on its feet. Because I'll tell you why. We are in the handshake era. We basically don't have an opposition. And the only hope Kenyans have is Parliament. We must get to a point, yes, we respect our leaders and we respect our party leaders, but we must get to a point where we reclaim the independence and the democratic rights in the House without being intimidated, without being threatened, that you can take a position. Because when you're in a hole, you don't keep digging. You get a way of getting out. Because as a country, we are in a mess and we are in agreement across board. So, in terms of making this decision, the reason it was contentious is because the noise vote was clearly rigged, and even the machines were interfered with, you know, from the beginning. Because
these are very serious.
If you looked at the voting, if you looked at the machines, you know, it was in the public. The media was in
that
there.
Even the numbers
it
showed
352, and we were like, we are 349 in total. So how did it get to 352? Even trying to vote through the machines yesterday was not working.
It was not working. This kind of allegations are very serious for an institution that makes laws, that actually voting inside there can be manipulated to that extent, that even the systems, the technology that is even set up for such actions can be manipulated to that extent.
Well, it's worrying in the sense that I think one, Parliament is reclaiming its position, which is good, but there could be other underlying issues that nobody is able to tell us today. Why I say so is I expected that in a division we'll have been able to see the landscape of those who will vote yes and those who will vote no. And if there were any members of Parliament who were absent, we'll also be able to know why were they not in the chamber at that critical time. Now, interfering with the machines is in keeping with what we fear, that we are eroding the space for democracy. Because if you erode space for democracy, knowing that the government would have won either way, I don't think the government would have gotten 233 members saying no to the memorandum. And therefore, possibly, at the beginning, it would have looked like the no's would have it, but the truth of the matter is that the president just needed about 118 members
in fact,
to be on his side. And that would assist him to win without whittling down the institution of Parliament. What happened yesterday is not only chaotic, but also despicable. Because I've known the two members of Parliament as people of decorum, and I've assumed that the rest of them will behave the same. But yesterday, that is not the House that I've known for many years.
I'm looking at a question here, and at MB asks, kindly ask Honorable Atandi whether it is the party that sent him to Parliament. He may as well go to the party in 2022, because people believe that you are there representing your constituents, the people, residents of Alego, Songa. But when you say you made your decision purely because the party decided to go that way, don't you think that your constituents, the people you represent, have a right to question your motives?
Well, any people can give their views, because this is not something that you will expect people to talk in unison. But I think I'm very clear in my mind that this issue was always going to be was always going to be an issue that would elicit mixed reactions, and this is very clear. You know, there are things that very important national issues, decisions that we must take as a political party. That is very clear. There are things that I can take on my own, but on matters that touch on...
So on this one, it was purely a political party issue.
This is a matter of very significant national significance.
Yet, Honorable Atandi, so, I have hosted you before and you said you had reservations on some of those proposals.
Yes, I had. And in fact, even if you look at our committee report, because I sit in the finance committee, we had reservations on a number of issues. One of the issues we had reservations was on Housing Development Fund, which if you look at our report, most of the committee members were objected to that that item. If you look at something to do with the tax on confectionery products, again, our committee pronounced itself on the same. But I want to blame Parliament, because this must come out. Because when members of Parliament go to the House and they refuse to listen to the reports, they go to the House with a preformed opinion that we are going to oppose everything. We are not. We don't want to make laws in that manner. Let us look at the items on the table. Look, when the chairman of Budget Committee read this report, and the speaker opened the floor for discussion, some members were even debating the finance bill instead of debating the budget report, because they went to the House with preformed opinion that we are going to oppose everything. So we really, I think the blame must go to Parliament. We must be able, as members of Parliament, to read and to look at items. This thing we would have been able to even reject some items, because we are going to vote item by item. Because if members were really ready to listen to the reports, we would have taken decisions based on items. Because there are some of those items that really we needed not to have passed, like the housing development, one of them.
And because MPs have now been accused, even those who were trying to marshal numbers, of being not genuine in that push, because probably you took too much time talking about VAT, 16% VAT, the reduction to 8%. But there's a lot more that will definitely affect Kenyans directly. And I'm looking at excess duty on all bank transactions, which has doubled from 10% to 20%. Kerosene prices, which have now gone up by 18 shillings a litre, which is really huge. 15% excess duty on telephone and internet services. 20% excess duty on money transfer services or mobile money transfer services. Don't you think that even members of the National Assembly did a disservice to the nation by focusing too much on the VAT imposed on petroleum products?
You know, Fred, most of us who are, personally have been saying I'll vote no, because if you read the Constitution, Article 115, in terms of the memorandum from the President, you cannot amend it. You can only amend it after Uganda 233. And that is where it was a catch-22 for members. So you either pass it the way it is, or Uganda numbers to actually even amend even a clause in the memorandum. That is why the numbers were very critical. And maybe what came out clearly was the issue of VAT. But for me, it is even harder, the issue of the fund that goes to the 1.5% is even a more, and even a scandal to come, if you ask me, because we have a history of government housing in this country. We had National Housing Corporation.
Yes.
Is it NHC? What is the history of NHC? If you remember, the only thing I remember is the former minister, Soita Shitanda, having allocated the wife the house. If you remember, Bishop Wanjiru had allocated her church. You know, those stories, those are the things I have in mind. And it became a scandal. So when you tell someone who earns 100,000 that they have to give 1.5% of their salary,
the employer has to match.
And you see, 100,000 in Nairobi is not such a lot of money. Because this is someone who may have a personal mortgage. The implication is that you'll have a mortgage which you'll be paying, and you'll still put a fund which is compulsory. And our management, management of funds is not very good in this country. So for me, the reason I would say no, and I voted no, was that specific
and
one.
I hear you.
And
but
we tried
the
in the
problem
morning,
is,
let me tell you.
Were members even keen on these other
They
provisions?
were keen. Let me tell you, by the time you got even this more than 200 and something to vote no in the House, it was not a one-day event. In fact, people had been called to PGs, like you hear Honorable Atandi. People are called to State House. I personally didn't go, but there are people who are called and still opposed. And it is not easy, because we have had a history of where we toe the line from the party leadership, as Atandi says. But for this time, members were even able to break, to forget the 200 and more, to break away from their party leadership. Even Kalonzo himself tried to whip. It didn't work. So it is a start, if you ask me. We didn't do perfect, but the fact that we already had more than 200 oppose this memorandum, it means then that maybe eventually Parliament will get away with
Honorable Kirwa, the executive has proposed this new taxes. Parliament appears to have bungled the process of actually oversighting the executive, and just by their behavior, this thing has passed. Where does the common mwananchi turn to? All these taxes are going to be burdened on the members of the public.
Yeah, I think Mheshimiwa Angare may be well-intentioned in opposing the memorandum from the president. But the truth be said, a number of things emerge. One, I think the executive is divided. There must have been mobilization in the opposite direction within the executive itself.
Correct.
It cannot be said to be unified. Also, Mheshimiwa Duale can do better. In fact, yesterday what emerged is that I realized Kimani Ichung'wah, while he was on the ES side, behaved better. He was more dignified in the way he tried to argue his case. But Duale really proved to me what I've always suspected, that he cannot be anything than just a laborator. Number three, Speaker Muturi should have also guided the House, because it takes the leadership of the House. I remember we went through similar situations with Mheshimiwa Kaparo, and he was able to steer the House. I remember even away from Parliament, I used to listen to Mheshimiwa Marende make very sober rulings, and he was able to steer the House despite the noise. Members of Parliament, yes, may get a motive, but what should be done is there must be leadership. That's why there is the Speaker. Speaker is not supposed to speak.
So you feel the Speaker failed?
The Speaker failed, Duale failed, and even the executive should be able to check themselves among their ranks.
Okay.
But Indimuli,
Yes,
this is headed to court. You can take that to the bank.
Is it?
It is headed to court.
Okay. Honorable Atandi, you say you voted because you voted...
We did not vote. There was no vote.
Well, you expressed your opinion on this matter in alignment to what your party had said. Yes? Did you discuss these issues at that PG where your party leader was? Or was it a blanket decision that whatever proposal that he just passed, did you break it down to actually 18 shillings a litre more for kerosene? Did you break it down to all bank transactions doubling the excess duty? Did that conversation go to that level?
Fred,
or it was simply,
Fred,
we will pass this as it is?
Fred, my contribution on this issue must be looked at from the point of my membership at Finance Committee, because we invited the CS for Treasury to appear before us to discuss the President Memorandum. And as I've told you, as a committee, we have a report which is very clear on the items that we had doubts on, one of which was the tax on confectionery products. We believe that because we are promoting manufacturing, we really needed not to really tax that particular sector, which is actually at its nascent stages. That industry is not yet well developed here. Then, of course, the question of housing development fund. It is not the business of government to force people to own houses. That is our position. If you want to own a house, you know where to go for loans. You know where to go for loans to own your own house. So the government cannot pretend to want to force people to develop a housing fund for which to own houses. These are very clear. These are very clear. These are very clear.
Which contains that as well. What are you telling Kenyans?
Listen,
that
Fred.
on one side you have questions, but on the other side you just simply
it is very clear. Fred, listen. Parliamentary work is done in committees. Yes, and when we went to the House, we were not given a chance to read our report to the House so that they can take a position. They started howling. What did you want us to do?
Now you're talking about the party position.
No.
Forget even about your position in the committee.
There are two things. I'm a benefit of being a member of the Finance Committee that is looking at this matter, that can talk to the public about the issues that we take. And I'm now talking to you as a person who was involved in cooking these issues. Yes. So when we do our report, and it is very clear, and we have made our statement, and we have said, in our considered opinion, this particular 1, 2, 3 items really need not to pass. And we have gone to our members in the House, because we in the committees, we represent members. And we want to read for them the report so that they can be able to take a position on each item. Because we are going to take a position on each item, we are going to vote on each item. The way there were 4 items.
But we read.
But despite your reservations on some of these things, you just said yes. Let it pass as
I did not say yes. What I'm saying is that there was no voting. Because if there was voting on each item, there are some items that would have voted yes. There are some that would have voted no.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, but now where do we turn to? Because now Parliament apparently has the National Assembly.
We have an option of going to court on some items. Like, I believe sincerely that this item on Housing Development Fund needs to be challenged in court. In my view, it is unconstitutional.
And what is your main reservation about that housing fund?
Because it is not the business of government to force me to contribute money for people to own houses. Yes, the government only needs to create a conducive environment through the financial sector, so that Kenyans can own houses. You cannot deduct money from my salary because you want me to own a house. What about if I already have facilities going on?
Is there anyone on this table who can actually explain to Kenya how this fund was intended to work? 1.5% mandatory
contribution for
yes, for anyone earning 100,000 shillings and above. But what is the benefit to them? Because the question is, any other fund we know, NSSF, pension, NHIF, we know you benefit with medical cover. So this housing fund, does it mean that if I make that contribution, I get a house? What does it mean?
You get to borrow or something like that. I think the people in the finance can explain. But for me, the reason I didn't even want to go to the details is simply because you cannot force people to build houses for other people.
Yet the devil is in the details.
You say, yes, it's in the details. But I opposed it from the beginning for one reason. If I contribute 1.5% and my employer contributes 1.5%, how is it going to be managed? Because that was not made clear to us. How was it going to be managed? Secondly, if you say you can trace my salary, that's why you can tell I earn 100,000 and more. Someone in Gikomba who earns $1 million or more and does not have a pay slip gets away with it because you cannot really get them into the system. Thirdly, if you have an individual mortgage, as many do, as many workers in Nairobi do, maybe even yourself, that you have your own arrangement of getting a house, how then does that fit in? And this is not something you choose. It is made mandatory. So you will be paying your mortgage and you still be contributing to a fund, which you may not benefit from because you already have your arrangement.
So it is not clear that contributors will necessarily benefit.
If you listen to Rotich, he was like, we are going to contribute for those who cannot afford. How do you even pick those who cannot afford?
Honorable Kira, before you come to Honorable Atandi, you've seen the history we've had with NSSF and the management of the funds, NHIF, and this kind of contribution is probably much higher than even what we're giving to NHIF or NSSF. Is it clear to you how this fund is meant to work out?
It's not clear, and I don't think it is clear even to the architects, unless the main objective was to look for another cash cow where they can get easy money, where the contributors don't even own the process. That means that we are going to have another scandal in the making. Number two, I think it is important that everything that we contribute as Kenyans, it must be clear from the beginning. So that as I contribute, I know it is Harambee that I'm giving. And therefore, we can do national Harambee. Otherwise, what is being done is taking money forcefully from the people, the way at some stage they were taking money to Kanu for teachers as Kanu members.
And it's a serious implication because, okay, fine, let me use probably the salaries to members of the National Assembly. And a modest estimate is about 700,000 for every member of the National Assembly. If we multiply that by 1.5%,
it's about 10.
It's about 10,000 shillings from someone, and then the employer has to match that. 20,000 shillings.
5,000 shillings.
It's a maximum of 5,000
shillings.
Either way,
maximum you can pay is 5,000 shillings.
5,000 shillings.
Yes.
Plus the employer must
5,000, and the employer will match.
So that's 10,000 shillings.
10,000 shillings.
When you contribute 10,000 shillings to any fund, Honorable Atandi, what should be the expectation for such a person who's contributing that
First of all, one of the reasons we rejected in our recommendations this fund is because the CS could not explain to us how it's going to be managed in the first place. Because first of all, there are no regulations. Regulations have not been put in place on how it's going to work. And when we asked why this fund was not going to be utilized by the National Housing Corporation, which of course is a statutory organization body, then the minister said no, that there will be future regulations on how the fund will be used, and we felt that this is really was going to be another cash cow.
So as it has passed now, there are still no regulations.
There are no regulations. There are no regulations. I think maybe the intention is maybe to approach it in the level of as an example, the level of NHIF. I think that's what they wanted. Where
so it is still not clear even to your
it
community?
Is not, it was not clear, and that's why we took action on it.
Wow.
And in fact, we were not happy with the CS, because when the CS advises the president on what to bring back to us, you know, it must be things that really can work. Because I'm happy, for instance, that they did not bring back the interest cap law. Because that's one of the items that was contentious in the finance bill, which as Parliament we rejected. I'm happy they didn't do that.
The fact of the matter now is that this, once it is assented to, this contribution becomes law unless challenged in a court of law.
And that's why we are saying this is something that...
So members of the National Assembly actually presided over this. So us members of the public were just looking and saying, okay, where do we turn next? Now
to court.
You know, in the only, and that's not the only issue with the housing, because yesterday, even as we were discussing in our own caucuses yesterday, and we were in that house throughout the day, and the question you ask your even fellow members, how many people have come to you and told you that their challenge is housing? How many in a day tell you their challenge is housing? Kenyans' challenges are in education, are in cost of living, are in the cost of paraffin, and those are the things that really touch Kenyans. And I really sympathize with the president in terms of he wants to do a legacy with the big four, but you know, a legacy is how you make people feel. If people feel that during your reign, paraffin was out of reach, charcoal was out of reach, then you will not have made a legacy. Yes. And it's something that we must really speak.
A liter of kerosene.
And how many people,
at about 90 shillings.
How many people even understand
18
adulteration?
18 shillings
18%
more on that is more than 20%.
If you know, the other reason I rejected the memo myself, 18%, you put an 18% adulteration levy.
18 shillings.
18 shillings, adulteration. How many? It took me, I think, until I grew up to know what even adulteration of fuel is.
It is actually more than 20%.
You know, adulteration of fuel is because for many Kenyans, charcoal with the anti-logging, there is no firewood. You're not using firewood. Charcoal is hard to come by. It is expensive. Then 38% of Kenyans are relying on paraffin.
Honorable Kirwa, I have to ask you this question. Do you think it is fair to Kenyans to listen to the two members of the National Assembly, given the kind of drama we saw yesterday? Now that house
did our bit. In the morning, I did my bit, and I would not be ashamed
Parliament,
to even talk about
Parliament must take the blame for what happened.
We take blame, but we didn't have the numbers, but we did our bit.
Parliament, as so many individuals, I've said the Speaker could have done better. The Leader of Minority and Majority would have done better. Also, members of Parliament who are opposed to this should have also been able to be slightly sober to allow themselves not to be used by the executive to pass the law by default. Because what they did, they walked into the trap. They didn't get the threshold number. They didn't get the necessary pressure and the sobriety to go through clause by clause so that they can remove what is offensive and retain what is good. So therefore, in the process of noise, the executive knew exactly where to pinch. And they got it, and they got away with it.
Some others would say that even the inclusion, when it comes to budget cuts, the proposals were to have a reduction of about 5.9 billion shillings from the national government CDF kitty. Some may argue that even the president was a bit, what would I say, was a bit, used that as a trick to actually bait the members of the National Assembly, because yes, you are allowed to actually amend that and the reduction is now much less. But by that amendment, it gave members of the National Assembly impetus probably to support this proposals on taxes.
Not really. I really do not want to relate the two. Supplementary budget, which we went through, and the finance.
Well, your colleagues did relate it because they said on this panel that
I think
if it touches CDF,
I think that's why we add, because for members of Parliament to have failed, because even when we were discussing the supplementary budget, members were not attentive, because some members who came with the notion of opposing, they did not even take time. Like, for instance, if you look at the austerity measures as was reflected in the budget cuts, I was not convinced, because how can you say that you are cutting recurrent expenditure by a merely 9 billion and you are cutting development budget by about 30 billion?
Yet during that session,
the whole discussion,
there was a lot of unanimity.
Yet the whole discussion from the president was about that we must enhance our austerity measures. So Parliament, we should have really taken time to look at really is this austerity? Because austerity cannot only be, in this budget, national government cannot be 9 billion only. And then you want to convince us. So really, as I insist, and I want to insist that really Parliament must sober up. We cannot have members of Parliament whose work is to make noise. You must look at figures. They fail to look at figures. I complain that we need to talk about these austerity measures. If, for instance, the recurrent expenditure was coming down by, let's say, 30 billion, that would have made sense, because really that is where the wastages are.
Oh,
we have not discussed.
There are a lot of questions with regard to your statements you've made here.
Yes.
And even without going through all of the questions, let me ask you directly. Why should we excuse you? Because you're talking about Parliament.
You are not excusing
why
me.
Why are we excusing you as an individual member?
You can't excuse me as an individual, because Parliament is an institution. It's not me only.
So when you say Parliament failed,
Parliament is, yes, I'm also included, yes.
Okay. I think that's fair.
We are
failed,
taking
yes.
it. And you know, in the Muli, for me, and I think where we must do better as Parliament is right from the budgeting process. Because when we pass a budget with a deficit, then we come back and try to do cuts and, you know, cut here, remove here, take here. We are really just joking around with it. And I think we as a Parliament, we must do better. Let us budget with what we have and what we can afford. I mean, during Kibaki's time, there's a time, I think, and I was asking Honorable Kimunya, he was credited with doing one of the best budgets that had no foreign aid, had no foreign support. I don't know what year it was, but I remember it.
Yeah, I think
And
2 consecutive years.
2 consecutive years.
So we are 96% locally funded.
So we can do something about it. This idea of doing a big budget, then we come to the finance bill, and then we now realize we can't afford it. And this issue of finance bill and the budget committee, we must get a way of getting these two together. I don't know, collapse them into one.
No, we should.
So that we don't have guys doing the issue of budgeting, then the finance come and say the source of revenue is not enough, so your budget is trash or we have to cut it. So let us get away, even in Parliament, to organize it.
I think I've said here that we need to start with finance bill before we go to the budget, because that's where the problem is. When we are doing the budget, we are very excited. We are saying, let's put this, let's put this.
Yeah, but
then when we come back to the finance bill, the resource revenue raising measures, then now we are hesitant.
And you've been accused of being, not being genuine because of that, because when you say we will not allow this budget cuts, or we will not allow this particular vote to go that way, then where do you expect
and actually, and that's why I want to blame members of Parliament, because when we were doing supplementary budget, they were saying no, let's not cut. And they were saying no. But I'm telling them that, okay, afadhali, let's cut the budget. And then we can now reject the revenue raising measures. But you cannot reject revenue raising measures and also refuse to cut the budget.
We have never been known to close the deficit.
Yes,
so let us
that's
now
the problem. And
face the
because
reality.
MPs members of Parliament want things to be put in the budget. You want everything to be put in the budget for you, and when you are told to raise revenue, you don't want. And personally, you know very well in this panel, I've always been pro-revenue, pro-taxation. I am a pro-taxation agent.
So even this
and I am against
all these taxes you approve.
I know. Listen, what I'm saying is that I support as a person, and as a person who has an experience on financial matters, I believe that a government must be self-sufficient. This idea of funding a budget through debt is something that I hate, and you know I'm working on a bill on debt management. Okay. So I will support measures that will ensure that our government is able to raise resources locally, as opposed to going for these debt issues.
Honorable Kirwa, you have a rich history about Kenya's, the way governments have run Kenya. Do you think that we would be right to say that probably this time around, this is the highest tax burden imposed by the executive on its people?
Yes, anybody can say that without any fear of contradiction.
It has never happened at
this level. It has never happened to this particular level. And partly because I think we have very ambitious budget. We could have done with 2 trillion. Why are we going to 3? Why do we want to look that we have such a big budget, bigger than the one of Kibaki, the one of Moi from independence? There's never been a budget like this. What we should be saying, how effective are we going to be? What you should be saying is that, can we increase those we are taxing? Because we are only taxing 3.2 million people, when it is possible we can tax up to 19 million people, given the fact that there are many people in the informal sector who can be captured into the formal sector, and the taxes can come down. Number 2, we ought also to reduce the level of wastage, the level of theft. Because you see, At times when you see somebody with a scandal, it is no longer news. The news is how big is the scandal? How big is the money that this person might have taken home? And we have made it look like government money is nobody's money. Those are some of the areas that we need to look into. And as I said last week, it is important that we pay all the people that the government owes money. That's the only way we can spur economy. We need to pay farmers, we need to pay contractors, we need to pay suppliers, and also we need to release money to the counties so that the counties can pay suppliers and contractors.
Time for a break, but we will not leave this discussion. We'll come back to discuss not just the
before
behavior,
you close,
not just behavior of members of the National Assembly.
There's something I'm happy about the supplementary budget. The fact that we were able to afford 1.5 billion for the judicial development budget for judiciary is something that I must applaud, and I must say that our judiciary now has the opportunity to continue constructing the course that they have been doing. When we were doing the petitions in Siaya, election petitions in Siaya, the High Court in Siaya was so tiny that members of the public were unable to go in and listen. But now that we have our High Court construction going on, now they can move on very fast so that the next petitions, the election petitions will happen in a more spacious court.
Okay. Time now for a break, but when we come back, we just take a look at the kind of burden every Kenyan is looking at. This is Daybreak. That's a hashtag to use. @Citizen TV Kenya is a Twitter handle. Keep the questions coming. We'll sample some of them after the break.